Hey everybody, how's it going? It's Steve Van Tassel here for Dynasty Owner. And we're in the 2022 Dynasty Owner off season, and it's time to start talking about how to assemble your roster for the next Dynasty Owner season, what's going on, keeping track of contracts and everything that's going on in the off season right now. I know it's still the NFL playoffs, but for Dynasty Owners, it's the off season. So I have a good article for you this week. Please read it on dynastyowner.com. Make sure you please to smash the like button here if you like the video. And so let's dive right into it. We're going to talk about players to amnesty before the new league year. And if you're unfamiliar with Dynasty Owner, we'll go over what an amnesty provision is. But these are players that basically you don't really want on your Dynasty Owner roster in 2022. So without further ado, let's talk about those players. So we've got the players to amnesty before the new league year, and the first thing we're going to do is, just for folks who might not be familiar, is go over what is an amnesty provision. Basically, it allows Dynasty Owner to drop a player with no 25% drop fee. Normally, if you drop a player, you have to pay 25% of the remaining contract. So if they have a 2-year contract for $5 million a year, that's $10 million. 25% of that drop fee would be $2.5 million. Basically, the amnesty provision allows you to waive that. So it's good to use if somebody has more than $20 million left on a contract. The good part is that they only cost $5 million Dynasty dollars. You get one for free in year one with your $39 entry fee. You can purchase up to one per year, and they can be acquired via trade as well. So that's what an amnesty provision is. So let's talk about some widely owned players who I think you should probably use an amnesty provision on if you have one, or you can buy one. So here's the first of those players is Russell Wilson from the Seattle Seahawks, and he is owned all these players are going to be owned in 80% or more of Dynasty Owner rosters. He is almost 83% owned. He's got 3 years left on his contract, and it's $35 million a year. And it's kind of harsh, but he hasn't had a great past year and a half here in Dynasty Owner. At the second half of 2020, he only averaged a little over 20 points per game, Dynasty Owner fantasy points per game. And last year, for the whole season, he averaged 22.3 Dynasty Owner fantasy points per game. They ranked him 15th, which is a drop from previous years. And it's just hard to roster somebody, for me at least, who costs $35 million when they're basically not even a top 10 quarterback. I mean, if you projected his stats over a 17-game season, he would have been the QB 10. So it's hard, I think, to have that much salary occupied by one player who's kind of not even a great starter right at this point. So that's really why I would use an amnesty provision on if you have Russell Wilson. The second player is Ezekiel Elliott, who is 100% owned. So obviously he has some value, and others might have value in your league. So you could try to trade him first. But I mean, the big number here is the 6 years left on the contract at $15 million a year. I mean, by the end of the contract, he's going to be 31, and his numbers just decline this year. I mean, Tony Pollard had better stats. You can look at my article and see all the stats that I provide on ways that Pollard was better than Ezekiel Elliott. I know Elliott had 1,000 yards rushing, but I mean, it was a 17-game season. He needed all 17 games to get there, and he just didn't seem the same after the Cowboys bye week. Now I know he was playing with a PCL injury, but I just don't think he's worth that contract anymore. So I personally would be trying to get rid of him, and maybe even thinking about using an amnesty. And the third widely owned player we're going to talk about here is Michael Thomas. And you see the video, if you're watching the video, you can see he's 79.9% rostered, technically under 80%, but we're rounding up here. And I'm kind of surprised he's still that widely owned. I thought people, when he was declared out for the season back in November, more people would get rid of him. We ran a contest. He was almost 90% owned at that time and only dropped to about 81%. And he still got 4 years and left on his contract at $19.25 million a year. for somebody who basically, if he suits up in week one next season, he's going to be 20 months removed from his last NFL football game. That seems like a lot of money to pay for somebody like that. Now, I'm not saying if you have a redraft league or a regular dynasty league, oh, sure, you keep him on the roster there. In a redraft league, sure, you might draft him, think about it. But I mean, a dynasty owner, 19.25 million, that's too much. I'm sorry. So next, we're going to talk about some marginally owned players. And sort of I've defined that as rostered in between 30% and 80% of dynasty owner leagues. So here's some of the marginally owned players to Amnesty. And the first one is Kenny Golladay, whose contract frankly shocked me when it was signed, 4 years, $18 million. And I'm really surprised that he's on a roster in over half of dynasty owner leagues. I mean, even when he was good this season, he wasn't great. He averaged 11.3 dynasty owner fantasy points per game in the first 4 games. Those were his best games of the year. With uncertainty around the Giants with their coaching and Daniel Jones, I just don't see how he's worth that money. Folks should have gotten rid of him when they had the chance when he signed that new contract. As you might know, players who sign a new contract, you have 7 days to decide to keep them or release them for free, and folks should have done that at that point, but they didn't, or some people drafted him this year, and I think I just cut ties with him right now. The next player is Julio Jones from Tennessee, who's also owned in about half of leagues. He has 1 less year left on his contract, only 3 years left, but his annual salary is $22 million a year. That makes him the second highest paid non-quarterback right now. And for that, you basically got 80 dynasty owner fantasy points this season, which is far too few. Julio's pushing age 33. And while you can still be a productive wide receiver at that age, I don't know if you can be a $22 million wide receiver at that age. So that's why I'd get rid of Julio. The third person on the list kind of pains me a little bit. It's Jonnu Smith, who I was very optimistic about being on New England. I thought he'd be a great addition to that offense, and that Josh McDaniels would use him in so many different ways, and it just didn't pan out. He's still owned in 41% of leagues. He's got 4 years on his contract at $12.5 million a year, and he was dreadful this year. Absolutely dreadful. He had 1 game with over 10 dynasty owner fantasy points. 1. He had 1 Blutarski, but his general game was under 3 points. He had 7 games with under 3 dynasty owner fantasy points. That's just not worth $12.5 million, obviously. So if you're still hanging on to Jonnu, maybe you think he'll be better in 2022. I don't know. I think I just cut ties right now, personally. But the fourth player here is Austin Hooper, who is the 5th highest paid tight end right now. That's gonna go down. But regardless, he's still being paid $10.5 million a year. He's owned about a third of dynasty owner leagues. And for that production, he was the tight end 24 this season. And last year, he was the tight end 21 with Cleveland. So, I mean, that's pretty much what you're going to get for Austin Hooper. Now, I know a couple of times during the year, I promoted him as a guy who you should play because he would have a good week. And in some of those weeks, he did. But that's far too infrequent to just have as a mainstay on your roster and pay $10.5 million. So I think it's time for Austin Hooper to hit the free agent auction in dynasty owner leagues. And the final player is Sterling Shepard, another Giants wide receiver, who's owned in a little over 40% of leagues. He's got 3 years left on his contract at $10.25 million a year. And the problem with Shepard is just he's injured. He has an Achilles injury. They're not sure if he's going to be ready for the start of the season. He's only played 29 out of games in the past 3 seasons. He's played well at times when he's played, but the problem is, does he play enough? I don't know. I don't think so. So I think I'd find a healthier, younger, better wide receiver than Sterling Shepard. And finally, we're going to talk about some lesser-known players, and these are guys who are owned in less than 30% of leagues. Not a lot of dynasty owners have them, but if you do, I really think you should use your amnesty provision and get rid of them. And not surprisingly, most of them are quarterbacks because quarterbacks are so highly paid. But we do have 1 non-quarterback. We have our list here of 5 players, and you can see the 4 quarterbacks are Deshaun Watson, Jared Goff, Carson Wentz, Matt Ryan, all of whom make $30 million or more per year. all who have contracts of at least 3 years left. Ryan has 3 years left. Wentz and Goff have 4. Deshaun Watson has 5, including this year. And so I just think all of them it could be gotten rid of right now. And the non-quarterback was interesting. I was surprised to see Kyle Juszczyk here. I didn't think that he would be owned in that many leagues. I was surprised at his level of ownership, 10.1%. And he's got a 5-year, $5.4 million contract. Now, mind you, if he was on my NFL team, I would love him. Great player. But on a dynasty owner team, he averages 4.8 dynasty owner fantasy points for each of the last 2 years, which is pretty good for him over his career. And I just think that it's just not worth having. You just can't afford that for $5.4 million a year. So maybe you were in a tough spot and you needed somebody and had some cap room this year, but I definitely think I would get rid of him right now and not pay that next year. So thank you very much for watching. Please make sure that you like the video here and read the article so you can get all of the thoughts I have on this, on these players who you should be amnestying before the new league year starts. And don't forget, tomorrow, Wednesday, we should have the Dynasty Owner live stream at 4 o'clock Eastern. And the rest of the week, we've got a lot of Dynasty Owner content coming up. On Wednesday, Jay Pounds is going to be back talking about how to rebuild your Dynasty Owner team. On Thursday, Nate Christian's here to discuss, give a prospect preview. I'm not sure who he's going to do, so you have to tune in to find out. And then it's Free Agent Fridays with Matt the Jerk. He's going to go through all the free agents on teams in one NFL division. So make sure to like all of their videos, watch all of their videos, read all their articles. And thanks for being a Dynasty Owner. Have a great day. I will see you hopefully tomorrow. Bye.